The great meeting hall of the Galactic Council shook as Ambassador Zilthara walked to the center of the room. Her crystal body flickered with colors that meant fear and sadness. She had traveled from the far edge of the galaxy to bring terrible news. Around her sat beings from 1,000 different worlds. Some looked like giant insects with many arms, others were made of living rock that glowed from inside. A few were just floating balls of light that spoke. Through music, they'd all come to hear what she had to say. My friends, Zilthara said, her voice echoing like wind chimes. We are dying. The room fell silent, even the musical light beings stopped their humming. For 3 months the Cathori horde has been destroying everything in their path. They do not want our resources. They do not want our planets. They want to watch us suffer and die, and they are very good at it. On the walls around the Great Hall, images appeared showing the destruction. Whole star systems had been reduced to floating debris. Beautiful worlds that had taken millions of years to grow were now nothing but ash and broken rock. We tried everything, Zilthara continued. The warrior poets of Andromache 7 were our greatest fighters. It lasted 2 hours against the KTH more crystalline empire sent their strongest defenders, beings made of pure diamond who could not be broken. The KTH more shattered them like glass. Being that looked like a walking tree raised one of its branch arms. What about the energy creatures from the Nexus? It cannot be touched by physical weapons. Zilthara's colors grew darker. Keith Mari absorbed them, turned them into part of their fleet. We watched our allies become our enemies. Fear rippled through the assembly. These were the most advanced civilizations in the galaxy. If they could not stop the Cathy, who could? In the back of the hall, a small insect-like creature named Sexay quietly worked at a computer terminal. As a junior archivist, he was not important enough to speak at the great meetings, but he was very good at finding information that others missed. While the ambassadors argued about battle plans that had already failed, Sexy searched through the deepest files in the galactic database. Most of the information was about peaceful worlds, trading routes, and diplomatic agreements, but there were other files too. Old files, scary files that most people never looked at. Forbidden worlds. Read one section. Quarantine zones, death planets, sex. High's compound eyes widened as he found what he was looking for, a single entry buried under layers of warnings and security locks. The file was marked with symbols that meant extreme danger in 17 different languages. Saw 3. The file. Read classification: Death World. Inhabitant status unknown. Last contact 247 standard years ago. Reason for quarantine: planetary conditions incompatible with known life. Kexa opened the file and felt his breath catch in his throat. The third planet from a small yellow star was impossible. The gravity was so strong it would crush most galactic species. The atmosphere was full of a deadly gas called oxygen that burned through living tissue. Weather included storms that could level cities and ice ages that could freeze entire continents. But the most frightening thing about the planet was not its dangers, it was that life had somehow survived there anyway. The file showed readings from the planet's surface. Despite all the terrible conditions, the world was full of living creatures, not just simple bacteria, but complex animals and even signs of intelligence. Radio signals had been detected over 200 years ago, along with evidence of cities and technology. Then suddenly the signals had stopped. They probably killed themselves. Most experts had concluded young species often destroy their own worlds with war or pollution. Another tragedy, but not our problem. But Kexa noticed something others had missed. The planet's life readings had not decreased after the radio signal stopped. If anything, they had grown stronger. The world was more alive now than it had been when they first detected it. What kind of creatures could survive on a world that would kill everything else in the galaxy? What had they become during their centuries of silence? On the main floor, the debate was getting heated. Ambassador Korath of the Silicon Collective was waving his rocky arms in frustration. We have tried every weapon, every strategy, every alliance. Nothing works against them. Then we surrender, said another voice. Evacuate what worlds we can and flee to other galaxies. There are no other galaxies. Zilthara's colors flashed bright red with anger. The KTH have been doing this for millions of years. They have consumed entire galactic clusters. If we run, we only delay our extinction. Sexai looked at the impossible readings from the death world called Sulri. In his mind, he tried to imagine what kind of beings could evolve in such a terrible place. They would have to be incredibly tough just to survive. They would need to be smart to build tools that could protect them from their own planet. They would have to be aggressive to compete with other deadly creatures. Most importantly, they would have to work together. No single creature could survive on a death world alone. Slowly, Sexy raised one of his thin arms. His voice was quiet, but the chamber's communication system picked it up and broadcast it to everyone. Excuse me, he said. I think I found something. The great ambassadors turned to look at the small archivist. Some seemed annoyed that their important discussion was being interrupted by someone so unimportant. What is it, young one? Zilthara asked kindly. Sexy's wings buzzed nervously. There is a world, a death world. We classified it as uninhabitable, but the life readings suggest otherwise. The inhabitants went silent over 2 centuries ago, but they are still there. Still alive, still growing stronger. Impossible, scoffed Ambassador Korath. No species can survive on a true death world. These apparently did, Sexa replied. He transmitted the file to the main displays. The assembled beings gasped as they saw the readings. The gravity, the atmospheric pressure, the radiation levels, the extreme weather patterns. It was a nightmare world that should have been completely sterile. What are you suggesting? Asked Zilthara. Sexai took a deep breath. Maybe we should ask them for help. The hall erupted in noise. Some beings laughed at the idea. Others were horrified. A few seemed intrigued. You want us to contact a species we know nothing about? Demanded Ambassador Korath. A species that survived on a world that would kill us just by being there. What makes you think they would help us? What makes you think they would not? Kexa replied. Every other species in the galaxy has tried to fight the KTH more with peaceful methods. The honor and dignity in civilized warfare. All of those species are now dead. He gestured to the displays showing the death world. These beings learned to survive in a place where everything wanted to kill them, where cooperation meant life and failure meant extinction. They did not have the luxury of being Civilized, they had to become something else. Zilthara studied the readings carefully. The planet's electromagnetic spectrum showed signs of massive industrial activity, nuclear power. Signatures suggested they had advanced technology, and GT, but there were other signs too. Chemical signatures that suggested they had weapons that could sterilize their own world several times over. They are dangerous, she said quietly. Sexy, replied Sortha Kethmore. The debate continued for hours, but eventually decision was reached. They would send a message to the Death World, a simple distress call asking for help. If the inhabitants were dead, there would be no response. If they were alive but unwilling to help, they could simply ignore the message. But if they were alive and willing to help, perhaps the galaxy had a chance after all. As the great ships prepared to broadcast the message across space, none of the peaceful aliens could imagine what they were about to unleash. They thought they were calling for help from fellow civilized beings. They had no idea they were about to wake up the monsters. Captain Jake Morrison was drinking his third cup of coffee when the signal arrived. It was 2:30 in the morning at Lunar Station Alpha, and most of the night shift was half asleep. The coffee was terrible, but it kept him awake during the long hours of monitoring empty space. The first sign that something was wrong came from the main communication array. Warning lights started flashing red and alarms began to sound throughout the station. Morrison nearly dropped his mug as he rushed to the control room. Lieutenant Amy Rodriguez was sitting at her desk, staring at her computer screen with wide eyes. She was the station's expert on alien languages, though until this moment her job had been mostly theoretical. Earth had never received a signal from another intelligent species. Captain, she said in a shaky voice, you need to see this right now. Morrison looked at her screen and felt his heart skip a beat. Numbers, symbols, and patterns were flowing across the display faster than he could follow, but at the bottom of the screen, in perfect English, words were appearing. Help us. We are dying. Please help us. Where is this coming from? Morrison asked. Rodriguez typed rapidly on her keyboard. Everywhere, sir. The signal is being broadcast from thousands of different points across the galaxy. It's like every star system is sending the same message at the same time. Morrison sat down heavily in a nearby chair. It's impossible. Yes, sir, it should be, but the computers are confirming it. This message is coming from multiple sources, all perfectly synchronized. Someone has the technology to coordinate a galaxy-wide broadcast. More text appeared on the screen. This time it was not a simple plea for help. Whose information? Technical data about an enemy that was destroying entire civilizations. Pictures of creatures that look like a nightmare crossed with a machine. Videos of beautiful worlds being consumed by living ships that fed on the suffering of their victims. God, Morrison whispered. How many are dead? Rodriguez checked the translation software. According to this, over 3 billion beings have been killed in the past week alone, and that number is growing. Morrison reached for his communication device. Get me the president now. Within 6 hours, every major government on Earth knew about the message. President Lisa Carter called an emergency meeting of the United Nations. Military leaders, scientists, and politicians gathered in New York to discuss what might be humanity's first contact with alien life. The debate was intense from the beginning. This could be a hoax, argued Secretary of Defense Robert Kim, some kind of elaborate test or psychological operation. Dr. Kevin Hughes from the SETI Institute shook his head. The mathematics are too complex, the physics too advanced. No human technology could coordinate a signal like this across galactic distances. This is real. General Pete Williams of the Space Defense Initiative studied the technical data about the enemy. These Cathy things, they're not just random destroyers. They have a pattern. They target advanced civilizations first, then work their way down to smaller colonies. They're systematic. President Carter looked tired. She had been in office for only 2 years, and most of her presidency had been focused on rebuilding Earth after the resource wars. The last thing she wanted was to get involved in someone else's conflict. Why are they asking us for help? Asked, according to this data, we're barely capable of interstellar travel. Dodd, what could we possibly do against an enemy that has destroyed advanced galactic civilizations? Dr. Hughes pulled up another section of the alien message. That's what's interesting, Madame President. Look at this part here. It's not just a request for help, it's a desperate broadcast to anyone who might be listening. They're not specifically asking us for help, they're asking everyone, so we're just one of many recipients. You might be the only ones who answered. The room fell silent as the implications sank in. Go. If the message was being broadcast across the galaxy and Earth was the only world that responded, that meant one of two things. Either every other intelligent species was already dead, they were too afraid to answer. Commander Betty Lewis of the Earth Defense Force studied the enemy profiles and GT. She had spent her entire career preparing for wars that might never come, wars against other humans, against possible alien invaders, against anyone who might threaten Earth. But this was different. Look at their attack patterns, she said, pointing to the tactical displays. They don't just destroy their enemies quickly, they draw it out. They want their victims to suffer before they die. They feed on fear. Dr. Hughes nodded. The message includes some psychological profiles of the enemy. They're not just physically powerful, they're psychic vampires. They literally consume the terror and despair of their victims. General Williams laughed, but there was no humor in it. Then they picked the wrong species to mess with. What do you mean, President? Carter asked. Madame President, every species they fought so far has been peaceful, advanced, civilized, probably had wars thousands of years ago and moved past them. They've never encountered a species like us. Williams pulled up Earth's recent history on the main screen. The resource wars had ended only 5 years ago, leaving scars across every continent. Before that, there had been World War II, the water conflicts, the corporate wars, and dozens of smaller conflicts that had shaped human society. We're not a peaceful species. Williams continued. We're barely 50 years past our last global war. Every human alive has grown up with the knowledge that our own species might destroy itself at any moment. We've learned to fight not just our enemies, but our own planet. Dr. Hughes was studying another section of the alien data. There's something else. Look at this. Biological information about the kth more. They regenerate from almost any damage. They can adapt to energy. Weapons, they're immune to most forms of radiation and chemical attack. So how do we kill them? Lewis asked. I don't think anyone has figured that out. Yet that's why they're winning. President Carter stood up and walked to the window overlooking New York City. The city had been rebuilt after the wars, but you could still see the scars. If you knew where to look, humanity had always been good at rebuilding after destruction. Dr. Hughes, she said, without turning around, in your expert opinion, do you think we should respond to this message? Hughes was quiet for a long moment. If we don't, we might be the only intelligent species left in the galaxy. If we do respond and try to help, we might all die trying. And if we stay silent, then eventually they'll find us anyway. These Cathy don't seem like the type to leave survivors. President Carter turned back to face the room. General Williams, what kind of fleet could we put together? Williams consulted his tablet. We have 12 ships capable of interstellar travel. Most of them are exploration vessels or mining ships, but we could retrofit them for combat. Maybe 1,000 personnel total, including crew and ground forces, against an enemy that destroyed galactic civilizations, against an enemy that has never faced humans before. The debate continued for hours, but eventually a consensus emerged. And GT, Earth would respond to the alien distress call, not because they thought they could win, but because it was the right thing to do, and because sitting and waiting for death had never been humanity's way. As the meeting broke up, Dr. Hughes approached President Carter privately. Madam President, there's one more thing from the alien message that I didn't mention in the meeting. What is it? Hughes showed her a section of translated text. They call our planet Deathworld. According to their classification system, Earth is one of the most dangerous planets in the galaxy. The gravity, the weather, the atmospheric composition, even the radiation from our sun. By galactic standards, we live in hell. President Carter smiled for the first time that day. Good, then we should feel right at home in a war. Within hours, recruitment centers across Earth were flooded with volunteers. The message had been released to the public, and humanity's response was immediate and overwhelming. Soldiers, engineers, scientists, ordinary citizens all stepped forward to join what the media was already calling the Galactic War. Commander Lewis found herself in charge of training programs that had to prepare humans for combat against an enemy unlike anything they had ever faced. But as she watched the volunteers training with weapons that could crack asteroids and armor that could survive in the vacuum of space, she felt something she had not expected. Hope. Humanity had always been at its best when everything seemed hopeless, when their backs were against the wall and the odds were impossible, when the only choice was to fight or die. The aliens had asked for help. They were about to discover what help looked like when it came from a species that had learned to thrive in hell. The Earth fleet that left the solar system 3 months later was small and strange-looking, 12 ships carrying just under 3,000 people. To anyone watching from the outside, it would have seemed like a joke. How could such a tiny force hope to fight an enemy that had crushed entire galactic civilizations? But the ships themselves told a different story. The USS Defiance, Admiral Gary Nelson's flagship, had Started life as a simple colony. Transport, now it bristled with weapons. That would have horrified the peaceful. Aliens who had sent the distress call. Nuclear missiles, railgun batteries, and particle beam weapons lined its hull. The ship's computer systems had been upgraded with artificial intelligence, programs designed for one purpose: finding the most efficient way to kill an enemy. Admiral Nelson stood on the bridge, watching the stars stream past as they traveled through hyperspace. He was a tall man with gray hair and tired eyes. He had fought in the resource wars and knew what it meant to face an enemy that would not surrender and could not be reasoned with. Admiral called Lieutenant Commander Susan Murphy from her station. We're receiving regular updates from the Galactic Council. The situation is getting worse. Nelson nodded. Every day brought news of more destroyed worlds, more dead civilizations. The KTH more were not slowing down. If anything, they seemed to be getting stronger as they consumed more victims. Any word on enemy positions? Yes, sir. Long-range sensors show a massive Cathmi fleet moving toward the Century Cluster. 300 inhabited worlds, over 50 billion people. Nelson did some quick calculations in his head. At their current speed, the human fleet would arrive at the cluster just hours before the enemy. There would be no time to evacuate the civilians, no time to set up proper defenses. Then we stop them there, he said simply. Major Carl Davis was in the ship's training bay working with his Marines on combat techniques. Davis was a short, stocky man who had earned his rank fighting in the underground tunnels of the resource wars. He knew how to kill enemies in close combat, and he knew how to train others to do the same. The Marines were practicing with weapons that the peaceful galactic species had never imagined. Explosive charges that could be detonated manually, flamethrowers that burned at temperatures hot enough to melt steel, and armor-piercing bullets that could punch through spaceship halls. Remember, Davis told his soldiers, everything we know about the enemy comes from races that fight clean. Energy weapons, shields, honor codes. These Cathy have never faced anyone who fights dirty. Sergeant Helen Brooks raised her hand. She was one of the few female Marines in the unit, but she had proven herself in urban combat during the resource wars. Major, what if their regeneration abilities make conventional weapons useless? Davis smiled grimly. Then we use unconventional weapons. Poison gas, biological weapons, nuclear devices, whatever it takes. The other Marines nodded. They understood. This was not a war for territory or resources. This was a war for the survival of all intelligent life in the galaxy. Rules and honor codes were luxuries they could not afford. In the ship's science bay, Dr. Kevin Hughes was studying every piece of data they had about the KTH more. He had volunteered to join the mission because he believed first contact with alien life was the most important moment in human history. He just had not expected that first contact to involve so much violence. The psychological profiles are fascinating, he told his assistant, Dr. Rachel Green. The KTH more feed on negative emotions, fear, pain, despair, but they don't seem to understand positive emotions at all. What do you mean? Green asked. Look at their attack patterns. They always give their victims time to realize they're going to die. They want to generate as much terror as possible. before the final kill, but they've never encountered a species that might actually be happy to fight them. Green looked confused, happy to fight them. Hughes pulled up psychological profiles of the human crew. Look at these readings. Stress hormones are elevated. Yes, but so are endorphins, adrenaline, and other chemicals associated with excitement and anticipation. Half our crew is actually looking forward to this battle. It's insane. That's human. In another part of the ship, Commander Betty Lewis was working with the tactical team to develop battle plans. Lewis had spent her career studying alien combat techniques, even though, until recently, no aliens had been available to fight. Now all that theoretical knowledge was about to be put to the test. Key is understanding how they think, she explained to her officers. Every species they faced has tried to minimize casualties, preserve infrastructure, fight honorably. They expect their enemies to retreat when the battle goes badly. Captain Billy Turner of the survey ship Hughes Pioneer nodded. So we do the opposite. We fight like we have nothing to lose. Exactly, because we don't. Lewis pulled up tactical displays showing Kether's ship formations. They always leave escape routes open for their enemies. They want survivors to spread fear to other worlds. But what if we don't try to escape? They won't know how to react, said Lieutenant Colonel Roy Stone. Their entire strategy is based on psychological warfare. If we're not afraid, their main weapon becomes useless. The journey to the Century Cluster took 3 months. During that time, the human fleet received constant updates from the Galactic Council. The news was always bad. More worlds destroyed, more species extinct, more proof that conventional tactics were useless against the KTH. More, but the humans used the time to prepare in ways. They studied the enemy's weaknesses, developed new weapons, and most importantly, they trained themselves to fight without fear. Captain Tony Martinez of the frigate U.S. Reaper spent hours working with his crew on damage control procedures, but not the kind of damage control most ship captains worried about. If our ship is disabled and being boarded, he told his crew, we don't surrender. We don't try to negotiate. We turn the ship into a weapon. His weapons officer, Lieutenant Sander White, looked uncertain. NGT, right. NGT, sir. Are you talking about ramming attacks? I'm talking about making sure that anyone who tries to capture this ship pays a price they'll never forget. Nuclear self-destruct is not just a last resort, it's a tactical option. Crew was quiet for a moment, then slowly, one by one, they nodded their understanding. Admiral Nelson called a meeting of all ship captains as they approached the Century Cluster. The holographic display showed the enemy force, dozens of biomechanical ships the size of small moons surrounded by swarms of smaller fighters. Gentlemen, ladies, Nelson said, in 12 hours we're going to face an enemy that has never been defeated. They have better technology, more ships, and experience fighting advanced civilizations. By all logic, we should be terrified. He smiled, but logic has never been humanity's strong point. We're going to show these creatures what it means to fight a species that grew up in hell. Captain Murphy raised her hand. Admiral, what are our rules of engagement? There are no rules. We use every weapon we have, every dirty trick we can think of, and every advantage our death world upbringing gave us. We don't fight to win gracefully. Fight to make sure that, even if we lose, they'll remember us. As the meeting broke up, the captains returned to their ships with new orders. But more importantly, they returned with something the HFY had never faced before. It's an enemy that was genuinely excited about the prospect of battle. Dr. Hugh was monitoring communications. When the first contact occurred, Cathy fleet had detected the approaching human ships and was transmitting what appeared to be a standard intimidation message. Surrender now, and your deaths will be swift, the alien voice said in perfect English. Resist and we will feed on your suffering for eons. Admiral Nelson's response was broadcast on all frequencies. This is Admiral Gary Nelson of the Earth Defense Force. We have a message for you. He paused for a moment, then continued. Picked the wrong species to threaten. See you in hell. Keith Maury fleet changed course to intercept the human ships. For the first time in their existence, they were about to face an enemy that did not fear death. They were about to learn why fear was not always a weakness and why sometimes the most dangerous enemy was one that had nothing left to lose. The first battle lasted 17 minutes and changed everything. Captain Susan Murphy watched her sensors as the massive Kethmore harvester ship approached her mining vessel, the UES Ironclad. The alien ship was 3 times larger than her own, covered in writhing tentacles and pulsing organic components. That made her stomach turn, but Murphy had not survived the resource wars by being squeamish. All hands prepare for contact, she announced over the ship's intercom. Remember, we're not trying to win pretty, we're trying to make them remember us. The Kethmore ship extended biomechanical tendrils toward the ironclad just as they had done to thousands of other vessels. The tendrils were designed to pierce enemy holes, drain their power systems, and feed on the life force of the crew inside. It was a technique that had never failed them, but the ironclad was not like other ships they had encountered. Murphy had spent the 3-month journey filling her cargo holds with refined uranium and connecting it to her ship's mining charges. The moment the alien tendrils made contact with her hull, she triggered the detonation sequence. The explosion was visible from 3 light seconds away. Nuclear fire raced through the Kether tendrils and into the harvester's central nervous system. For the first time in their species' history, Kether felt something they had never experienced: genuine, overwhelming pain. The harvester's death scream was broadcast on psychic frequencies that reached every Keithy vessel in the sector. The sound was not just pain, but something worse: fear, pure, absolute terror from a creature that had never known what it felt like to be prey. Admiral Nelson watched the explosion from the bridge of the Defiance and smiled grimly. That's one down. All ships, you are cleared to engage. Remember, no survivors on their side. The HFY fleet, still reeling from the psychic shock of their harvesters' death, moved to surround the human ships. They expected the tiny Earth fleet to try to retreat or surrender. Instead, the humans accelerated toward them. Captain Billy Turner of the survey ship U.S. Pioneer was the first to reach the enemy formation. His ship was small and lightly armed, but Turner had spent years exploring dangerous asteroid fields and knew how to fly in impossible situations. As HFY fighters swarmed around his ship, Turner led them straight into the gravity well of a nearby gas giant. The organic fighters designed for space combat, were crushed by the planet's massive gravitational forces. Turner's ship, built to handle Earth's crushing gravity, flew through the danger zone and emerged on the other side. Pioneer to all ships, Turner broadcast confirmed kill on 12 enemy fighters. These things don't handle heavy gravity very well. Major Carl Davis was leading the boarding action on a Cathay cruiser. His Marines had used magnetic grapples to attach their assault shuttle to the alien ship's hull, then cut their way inside with plasma torches. The interior of the Kethmore ship was a nightmare of organic corridors that pulsed like living tissue. The walls seemed to breathe, and strange fluids dripped from the ceiling. It was designed to terrify invading forces. Davis looked around at the alien environment and grinned. Boys, this reminds me of the sewers under New Detroit. Remember, if it moves, kill it. If it doesn't move, kill it anyway. The Marines advanced through the ship using tactics that no galactic civilization had ever employed. They used flamethrowers to sterilize organic growth, explosives to collapse passages behind them, and poison gas to clear rooms ahead of them. The biomechanical corridors, designed to heal from energy damage, had no defense against beings who understood that sometimes the best solution was overwhelming violence. Sergeant Helen Brooks found herself face to face with a Cathmi warrior form in one of the ship's central chambers. The creature was enormous, standing 3 m tall, and covered in adaptive armor that shifted and changed as she watched. It had absorbed the combat knowledge of dozens of defeated species and could counter any attack they had ever used. Warrior form studied Brooks through multiple sets of eyes, analyzing her equipment and fighting stance. It shifted into a defensive configuration that had defeated the greatest champions of the Crystalline Empire. Its weapon systems powered up, ready to demonstrate why resistance was futile. Brooks pulled the pins from 2 grenades, held them against her chest, and smiled. Ugly. Want to know what humans taste like? We taste like dying hard. The warrior form recoiled in confusion. In its vast combat database, there was no record of any enemy that would voluntarily embrace death to achieve victory. The concept was so alien that it took the creature several precious seconds to process what was happening. Brooks threw the grenades and dove behind a bulkhead. Explosion tore through the warrior form's adaptive defenses before it could compensate for an enemy that had no survival instinct. Brooks to Major Davis, she called over her radio. Central chamber secured. One really ugly alien down. Good work, Sergeant. Plant the charges and get out, returning this whole ship into scrap metal. Admiral Nelson coordinated the battle from his command chair, watching as his small fleet systematically dismantled enemies that had crushed armadas. The key was understanding what the Keith Mari really were. They were the ultimate predators, evolved to hunt prey species that valued their own lives above all else. But humans were not prey. Humans were also predators, and they had learned something the KTH more never had. Sometimes the best way to win was to make sure your enemy could never forget the cost of fighting you. Captain Tony Martinez demonstrated this principle when his frigate, the UES Reaper, was caught between 2 Cory cruisers. His ship was heavily damaged and his crew was down to half strength. By any reasonable measure, he should have tried to retreat. Instead, Martinez accelerated toward the larger of the two enemy ships. All hands, this is the captain, he announced over the intercom. It's been an honor serving with you, Hell. Earth. We opened the door as his ship approached the Kethmore cruiser. Martinez activated the ship's communication system and began broadcasting human music on all frequencies, death metal war songs, funeral dirges, and the hymns that soldiers sang when they knew they were not coming home. The KTH, more accustomed to hearing screams of terror and pleas for mercy, reacted with something approaching panic as the music filled their psychic senses. These were not the sounds of prey animals, these were the sounds of predators preparing for battle. The Reaper struck the Cathor cruiser at ramming speed, its nuclear reactor set to overload on impact. Explosion destroyed both ships and sent shock waves through the enemy fleets. Psychic Network, Dr. Kevin Hughes, monitoring the battle from the Defiance's science station, watched the psychological effects ripple through the Kethmore formation. Admiral, their coordination is breaking down, reading massive spikes in what I can only describe as fear responses. Nelson nodded. They've never faced an enemy that fought back like this. Signal all ships, press the attack while they're confused. The battle continued for 3 hours. When it was over, the human fleet had lost 4 ships and nearly 1,000 people, but the Kethmari force had been completely destroyed. More importantly, word of the battle spread through the enemy's communication network at faster than light speeds. For the first time in their species' history, the Cathi experienced something they had never felt before, the knowledge that there was something in the universe more dangerous than they were. Lieutenant Commander Sandra White, now in command of what remained of the Reaper's crew, after they had been rescued by other ships, received a transmission from Admiral Nelson. White, your crew performed admirably. What's your assessment of enemy capabilities? White looked at the tactical displays, showing the wreckage of the KTH. More fleets, or they're tough, but they have a weakness. They're not used to fighting anyone who wants to fight them back. They're used to hunting prey, not battling other predators. Understood. Signal the fleet. We're moving to intercept the next enemy force. It's time to teach them what happens when they pick a fight with humanity. As the human fleet departed the battlefield, leaving behind the shattered remains of what had been considered an unstoppable enemy force, a new message began to spread through Cathi space. It was not transmitted through their usual communication networks, but through something deeper, the collective psychic consciousness that connected their entire species. The message was simple and terrifying. There were things in the darkness that hunted the hunters, and they were